Hello everybody. So for my latest book review, I'm going to review this book, There But for the Grace of God, written by Rosen, and the subtitle is Survivors of the 20th Century's Infamous Serial Killers. And as you can see, I found this book at Dollar General and it was only $1. And I personally find true crime books really interesting, especially serial killers. There's something about serial killers that's really interesting. It makes you wonder, like, what's going on in their head and what makes them the way they are. So some of the people that talks about are the survivors of David, the son of Sam Berkowitz, Bobby Joe Long, Richard Speck, Ted Bundy, the BTK killer, Derek Todd Lee, and Jeffrey Dahmer, or otherwise known as the Milwaukee Cannibal. And this book, it was really interesting. Here's the back cover. It just has a few pictures of some of the serial killers and tells you kind of what the book's about. But this book is about people who did survive these notorious serial killers and how they survived and kind of what their thoughts about the experiences are. And it was fascinating from that angle. I will say, the way it was written, Rosen, he has an interesting sense of humor, and sometimes it almost borders on like, well, I don't know if that's really something you should make fun of because, these are people who were killed by serial killers when he's talking about the victims and stuff, which I did underline a couple of things that I wanted to point out. And let's see. One is when he's talking about one of the victims of, let me see who this was again, because it's hard to remember who was a victim of who. This is a Derek Todd Lee victim. And it says, Kennemore, who is one of the victims, had also been found out for her morning float. And like little quips like that about finding bodies of people who were murdered is just, I don't know, it's bordering on, that's a little too far, but it's kind of funny because I usually have kind of a dark, cynical sense of humor. But I also tend to think that there are certain subjects that maybe you be careful with, and victims of serial killers is definitely what I would be careful about. And I'm sorry if I still sound a little stuffed up. I'm still fighting this cold that actually, well, it's actually a viral infection that turned into a sinus infection, but, that's why I sound a little funny. And there's another place in here I marked that I wanted to talk about. If I can find it. There it is. Oh, he calls one of the victims an ignorant cracker. And that just, I don't know, like calling a victim a name like that is maybe a little disturbing. Not to mention, not politically correct, but aside from that, just the whole fact that it's a victim is kind of, bothersome. And it also bothered me that the writer, Rosen, in a lot of these cases, when he was talking about the victims, he would mention, well, if they'd have tried to do this, maybe they'd have lived, or if they'd have tried to do that, they could have survived. And to me, that kind of bothered me because it almost made it sound like, well, they didn't fight hard enough to live. It's, their fault. And I know that may not be quite what he meant, but in some ways it came off that way. So those are probably the things I wasn't sure about with the book. I didn't know if I particularly liked. And I mean, it is a gruesome book. I'm not going to go into really extreme detail about the gruesomeness. Hopefully most parents wouldn't let their kids watch this video anyway. But since I do have some kids that watch like my toy videos and stuff, I don't want to go into really extreme gruesome detail in case there are kids watching whose parents don't monitor what they watch. But along with the stories about the survivors, there's also in the middle like some pictures of some of the people who were killed or were not killed, the survivors, and also of some of the murderers. So, I mean, that part is kind of interesting too. It adds a little bit of visual interest to the book. Although I've seen documentaries on almost all of this, infamous serial killers, so I kind of already knew what a lot of them look like and stuff like that. But the thing I did, like I said, this book was unique in that it told the story from the point of view of someone who survived each attacker. And that in itself is really interesting to read, kind of their viewpoint on what happened and why they did the things that maybe saved their lives in the long run. And some of them, I mean, were pretty smart. Like one woman to survive, the serial killer had tied up a bunch of women, and I mean, he went through and killed them all. But she started thinking that since he seemed to be drunk, that maybe he wouldn't realize if she rolled under the bed, and he wouldn't realize that he was missing one because maybe he didn't count them. And that actually saved her life. It worked. She survived. She just stayed under there until unfortunately, he had, killed everybody else, and then she managed to get free. And in some ways, that may sound kind of cold, like she, was hiding while everybody else was being killed. But she was tied up, and I mean, there's no way she could have overpowered the killer herself, probably, even if she could have gotten loose in time. So I think it's not fair to be too harsh on, people when they're trying to save their own lives. And I think the story that like most made me sad was when they were talking about Jeffrey Dahmer's victims, and one of his victims actually escaped him before he was caught. And this victim ran out of the house screaming, and he wasn't American. He was from, I can't remember where, but somewhere in Asia, I think. And so he was speaking a different language, and he was screaming in his own language, he's going to kill me and eat me. But and he ran into cops, this kid who got free, and he was only 14. He got free from the killer, and he was like literally running outside. I think it said he was naked, and he had some blood on him, and he was screaming this, and he actually ran into cops, and the cops got involved, and because he didn't speak English, they couldn't tell what he was screaming. And Jeffrey Dahmer came out and convinced them that this guy was actually his 19-year-old lover who was just drunk and angry. And he convinced the cops to let him take care of it. And so he took the 14-year-old, back up to his apartment, and I mean, he killed him. So it's really sad that, that kid easily, his life could have been saved. And I mean, he didn't have to go through all that, and the other victims that were killed after that wouldn't have had to go through that if the police had just checked into it a little further, especially since Jeffrey Dahmer already had on his record an arrest for child molestation. So it's just things like that are really bothersome, especially when you consider that there were also two eyewitnesses who were two African American girls who told the police that they didn't think Jeffrey Dahmer was telling the truth, that this kid was trying to get away from him and he was truly terrified. And the police still took Jeffrey Dahmer's word for it over, the actions of this boy and the two eyewitnesses. And that's just really sad. And I don't want to start a whole race thing, although the book does kind of go into the fact that at least the author thinks that it was race driven, because the kid wasn't American, and because the girls were African American and Jeffrey Dahmer was white, that a lot of people think that's why the cops took his word for it. And I'm not saying that's true or not true, but it's still really disturbing when you think about that. So I guess that's the review for this. And like I said, I like stuff like this. I like stuff that makes me think about psychology and just what makes some people so messed up. And I still don't really have a clue what makes people so messed up, but it's still interesting to read about and, find out what some of them maybe made them tick and things like that. So that's my book review for today. And I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you've read this book, or if you are a true crime reader and you want to comment, feel free to do so. Let me know other books maybe that I should check out that are true crime or related to serial killers or whatever. And I appreciate all of you watching. My links below are in the description of the video for Facebook, Twitter, all that kind of stuff. So feel free to follow me there if you want to. And I hope you have a good day. Bye.